Pear Desktop is one of those stories in the Linux world that feels almost mythical. A blend of ambition, controversy, inspiration, and lessons about branding, freedom, and community. Imagine a time when Linux was often criticized for being powerful but ugly, flexible but intimidating, and friendly only to those willing to tinker endlessly. Into that landscape stepped Pear Desktop, a project that boldly asked a simple but provocative question. What if Linux could look and feel just as polished, intuitive, and visually refined as macOS, while still remaining free and open at its core? This idea alone was enough to capture attention, but the way Pear Desktop executed it turned the project into one of the most talked about Linux distributions of its era. Pear Desktop, originally known as Pear OS, was based on Ubuntu, which already gave it a solid foundation in terms of stability, package availability, and hardware support. By choosing Ubuntu as its base, the developers ensured that users could access a vast ecosystem of software while focusing their own efforts on user experience and design. From the very first boot, Pear Desktop made it clear that aesthetics were not an afterthought. The interface was sleek, smooth, and carefully crafted, with a dock at the bottom of the screen that immediately reminded users of macOS. This dock was not just a visual copy, but a functional centerpiece of the workflow, allowing users to launch applications, switch between running tasks, and access frequently used tools with ease. The desktop environment used by Pear Desktop was heavily customized, often built on top of GNOME or Cinnamon depending on the version, but transformed so deeply that many users barely recognized its roots. Window animations were smooth, icons were meticulously designed, and the overall theme was cohesive in a way that many Linux distributions at the time struggled to achieve. Fonts, spacing, colors, and shadows were all chosen with a clear design philosophy in mind, aiming to deliver a premium, modern look. For users coming from macOS, this familiarity lowered the barrier to entry, making Linux feel less foreign and more welcoming. One of the most distinctive features of Pear Desktop was its attention to small details. System sounds were carefully selected, login screens were visually appealing, and even the default wallpapers felt like they belonged to a high-end operating system rather than a community project. The application menu was designed to be intuitive, often resembling the macOS launcher, with categorized apps and a clean layout. File management was simplified, and common tasks like connecting to Wi-Fi, managing Bluetooth devices, or adjusting display settings were straightforward and visually consistent. Pear Desktop also shipped with a thoughtfully curated selection of pre-installed software. Instead of overwhelming users with dozens of applications, it focused on providing the essentials needed for everyday computing. A modern web browser, a media player, a file manager, an office suite, and system utilities were all included, configured to match the overall design language. Multimedia support was usually available out of the box, which was a big selling point for users who did not want to deal with codec installation. This focus on usability made Pear Desktop particularly attractive to newcomers who wanted a system that just worked after installation. However, the very thing that made Pear Desktop famous also made it controversial. Its visual similarity to macOS raised questions about originality, legality, and the ethics of imitation. Critics argued that Pear Desktop crossed the line by copying Apple's design too closely, potentially infringing on trademarks or intellectual property. Supporters, on the other hand, saw it as a form of homage or inspiration, pointing out that open source software has always borrowed ideas from proprietary systems, and vice versa. They argued that Pear Desktop was not trying to deceive users into thinking it was macOS, but rather offering a familiar experience for those who appreciated Apple's design but wanted the freedom and flexibility of Linux. This debate intensified as Pear Desktop gained popularity. Videos, screenshots, and reviews spread rapidly across forums and social media. OFTEN highlighting how Mac-like the system looked. For many users, this was precisely the appeal. They wanted a system that felt elegant and polished without being locked into Apple's ecosystem or hardware. Pear Desktop became a gateway distribution for some users, helping them transition from macOS to Linux with minimal friction. It demonstrated that Linux could be beautiful, user-friendly, and visually competitive with the best proprietary operating systems. Despite its growing fan base, Pear Desktop's journey was not smooth or sustainable in the long term. The project was developed by a relatively small team, and maintaining such a highly customized distribution required significant effort. Keeping up with Ubuntu updates, ensuring compatibility with new hardware, refining the user interface, and addressing bugs all demanded time and resources. At the same time, the controversy surrounding its design may have added pressure, both legally and within the Linux community. Some purists viewed Pear Desktop as superficial, focusing too much on appearance rather than innovation or openness. The turning point came when the Pear Desktop website suddenly announced that the project had been acquired by a company and that the free version would be discontinued. This announcement shocked the community. Users were informed that Pear OS was no longer available for download and that development had effectively ended. The exact details of the acquisition were never fully transparent, which led to speculation and confusion. Some believed that legal threats forced the shutdown, while others thought it was a business decision to move toward a commercial product. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. Pear Desktop, as an open and freely available Linux distribution, was gone. The disappearance of Pear Desktop left a noticeable gap in the Linux landscape. It had shown what was possible when design and user experience were prioritized, and its absence reminded users how fragile community-driven projects can be, yet its influence did not vanish with it. Many of the ideas popularized by Pear Desktop lived on in other distributions and desktop environments. Projects like Elementary OS, Deepin, and later versions of Linux Mint continued to emphasize visual polish, simplicity, and cohesive design. While these projects developed their own identities rather than copying macOS directly, they shared the same core belief that Linux should be accessible and attractive to everyday users. Pear Desktop also sparked broader conversations within the Linux community about the role of design and imitation. It challenged the notion that Linux had to look unique or unconventional to be legitimate. Instead, it suggested that familiarity could be a strength, especially for users migrating from other platforms. This perspective has gradually gained acceptance. As more distributions focus on user-centered design, usability testing, and visual consistency. In that sense, Pear Desktop was ahead of its time, even if it did not survive long enough to fully realize its potential. Another important aspect of Pear Desktop's legacy is how it highlighted the tension between freedom and sustainability in open-source projects. While the software itself was based on open-source components, the project's abrupt end raised questions about transparency, ownership, and community trust. Users who had invested time in the system felt disappointed and even betrayed by its sudden disappearance. This experience reinforced the importance of open governance, clear communication, and community involvement in long-term open-source sustainability. Many later projects have learned from this, striving to be more open about their roadmaps and funding models. From a technical perspective, Pear Desktop was not revolutionary in terms of underlying architecture, but it did an excellent job of integrating existing technologies into a cohesive whole. It demonstrated how powerful theming, configuration, and thoughtful defaults could transform a standard Linux base into something that felt entirely different. This approach inspired countless themes, icon packs, and customization guides that allowed users to recreate the Pear Desktop look on other distributions long after the original project ended. Even today, you can find tutorials and community efforts aimed at rebuilding the Pear OS experience using modern Linux tools. For many users, Pear Desktop remains a nostalgic memory, representing a moment when Linux felt daring and experimental in its approach to design. It was a reminder that open source software does not have to compromise on aesthetics to maintain its principles. While some may dismiss it as a macOS clone, others see it as a bold experiment that pushed the boundaries of what Linux desktops could look like and how they could feel. Both perspectives hold some truth, and together they form a balanced understanding of Pear Desktop's place in Linux history. In the broader context of desktop computing, Pear Desktop serves as a case study in differentiation and inspiration. It shows how borrowing familiar concepts can help attract new users, but also how important it is to establish a clear and sustainable identity. The project's rise and fall illustrate both the opportunities and risks involved in challenging established design norms. It also underscores the importance of community trust, legal awareness, and long-term planning in any software project, especially one that gains rapid popularity. Today, when you look at modern Linux distributions with sleek interfaces, smooth animations, and carefully crafted user experiences, it is hard not to see echoes of what Pear Desktop tried to achieve. While technology and design trends have evolved, the core idea remains the same. Users want systems that are powerful, free, and beautiful. Pear Desktop may no longer be available to download, but its impact continues to be felt in subtle ways across the Linux ecosystem. In the end, Pear Desktop was more than just a Linux distribution. It was a statement, a challenge, and a conversation starter. It asked whether Linux could compete with proprietary systems not just on principles, but on polish and usability. It dared to blur the lines between inspiration and imitation, sparking debates that are still relevant today. And although its life was short, Its legacy endures as a reminder that innovation in open source can take many forms, including the courage to prioritize beauty and user experience in a world that often undervalues them.